when I was investigating into like this globalist New World Order conspiracy for the coming of the Dajjal, Egypt just kept popping up again and again and again. If you look at it from the perspective of the Jinn, who we presume were created on Earth, Earth is their home, we're the extraterrestrials, because Adam wasn't made on the Earth. We're talking about people here that are dealing with so-called hidden knowledge, occult knowledge, that the ordinary masses don't have access to.
Right.
But there is rumors that they are digging under Al-Aqsa, that they are looking for the Ark of the Covenant.
We are partnering with Droplets of Mercy in order to bring life-saving water to the people of Gaza, Sudan and beyond, who have been affected by war and famine. The best charity is giving water, so click the link in the description box in order to help save lives now.
There's things going on we don't always know about, that are hidden, that are not there to benefit the likes of you and I. They're there to benefit a fringe minority. And some of the things that they do to benefit from that, would make the average person feel shocked and disgusted.
No, absolutely. I mean, with the recent release of the Epstein files, I think it's, again, more out of the realms of conspiracy, more into the realms of reality for people. You were doing a lot of field work over these years that you went public, Egypt, etc.
Yeah.
Now, Egypt is significant, bro, because from my research, Egypt keeps cropping up when it comes to the topic of UFOs and the occult and the cabal and all of this type of stuff. It's all being linked back to Egypt. So maybe that's a good place for us to start, right? Why is it that these entities, these NHI as they're called today, when they are communicating with human beings, they're always referencing back to Egypt? You've been there. You've been researching it. What have you discovered? What can you share with us?
I don't know. I've always just been fascinated by Egypt and the pyramids. And I guess there's always been a degree of mystery to do with Egypt. Like, well, how did they build the pyramids and this, that? And then when you go a little bit more of a deep dive into it, you find out about places like called the Osirian, that a lot of what I would call alternative historians that say actually it predates dynastic Egyptian history was like, and then it feeds into like a lot of stuff by like Graham Hancock, Andrew Collins, that say, well, actually there was an advanced civilization. And I think when we say advanced, we have to be careful how we use that word. We don't mean that they were flying around in spaceships.
Sure.
When we mean advanced, maybe they had a system of established writing, which is really interesting because I watched a very short clip recently by a professor, I believe, from the British Museum. And he was talking about Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. And he mentioned that there was like a stone that seemed to have like a imagery carved on it. And he said, well, to me as a historian, that shows a writing system. Now, he said, supposedly we're being told at 12,000 BC, we hadn't developed a writing system. And then there was a really good book I read called Forbidden Archaeology by Michael Cremo, that he said clearly there is evidence of humanity as we know them, you and I, existing perhaps even 100 million years ago on Earth. Not this late 100,000. He's talking about 100 million years ago. And he said it's being pushed back further and further and further. And that really just really fascinated me. But the real fascination for me with Egypt has to come with the story of Moses, peace be upon him. And I've always, who was the Pharaoh? And it's like, they always say it's Ramesses, but that never really sat with me, and then I was really fortunate that I came across a really good alternative Egyptologist, I would call him. His name's Dr. David Rowe. And he primarily using the Bible, but he was able to bring another narrative to the story of Musa and identifying the Pharaoh. Now, what he says that the Pharaoh of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam was a Pharaoh called Dudmos II.
Okay.
Now, he says that the Pharaoh of Musa that found Musa, whose wife found Musa, that is mentioned in the Quran, is a pharaoh called Sobek-Hotep IV.
Okay.
And I was very fortunate recently to meet Dr. David Rowe, and hopefully going to do some really good stuff with him, because I believe that there's evidences in the Quran that not only sheds light on the study that he's done, it actually backs him up.
Right.
But I'm not going to mention too much about it, because we have to leave that for another time. But like I said, when I was investigating into like this globalist New World Order conspiracy for the coming of the Dajjal, Egypt just kept popping up again and again and again. I think the reason why this Council of Nine, Ra, have a fixation with Egypt, because I think it represents a society where essentially they were in total dominance, and these NHI were worshipped.
So the NHI were in dominance in these societies.
Yes,
and they were seen as gods.
They were, because if you think this NHI can manifest as a hawk-headed god and could proclaim to be Horus, and is able to do things that ordinary humans cannot seemingly be able to do, what are you going to do as primitive man? You're going to worship it and say, well, this is my God has arrived, and look, my God can do this, and my God. So I think even more than Sumerian civilization that predates the Egyptians, but not that much by, I think with Egyptian civilization, we see a society totally devoted to the worship of the gods who were this NHI in disguise.
Wow. So we're going to get to who you believe these NHI are.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially what you're saying is that the reason these entities, these non-human intelligences, make reference to Egypt is because this is a good memory of the past. This is the time they were worshipped as gods and elevated.
It's like any group of people, they like to remember the greatness of their civilization or the greatness of their empire. And if we imagine it that this NHI, their greatness of their totality of servitude was in Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Every prophet comes with the message that there is one God who is free of all imperfections, does not need anybody, but everybody needs him. And obviously that is that eternal conflict from the time of Adam up until the day of judgment.
Yes.
Between God and those who oppose God. It has a name to it. You call it in Islam, we call it Iblis, Lucifer, Satan. But it's kind of like, and the Quran mentions this, it says Hizbul Shaitan, the party, the group of the Satan. You can argue does that mean Satan has a cabinet? Maybe he does. Maybe he's got advisors that sit and advise him, and this is how we're going to fool humans. We're going to do it this way. You know what? Now I'm kind of looking at, I kind of see the devil is like this. When I give an analogy of this kind of corporate CEO, that he sits there with his minions, and what have you been doing in this, and what have you been doing in that?
Yeah.
Well, I've done this, and then there's that very famous hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says about how the devil sends out his troops, to cause divorce and separation between husbands and wives, and then one of them comes back and says, I caused this problem between a husband and wife, but did you cause them to divorce? No. Get out of my sight. So I kind of see, and I'm going to say this, the devil is a failing corporate CEO because he's always going to fail.
Yeah.
And what we have to understand is that the devil realized he lost with Egypt.
Right.
But then he maybe reorganized and said, okay, how are we going to reorganize? What's the next plan? And then, you have Christianity comes along, and then people then start seeing manifestations of Jesus, manifestations of the Virgin Mary.
Paul's original vision.
Yeah, Paul's original vision that nobody else can substantiate. Only Paul saw it.
Yeah.
And nobody else saw it. And yet, surprisingly, even with a basic reading of the New Testament, if we read, we know, for example, that the disciples were very much against what Paul was saying. You're preaching this, this goes totally against the message of Jesus, peace be upon him. But yet, like I say, people start visionings of Jesus. And then Islam the finality of Islam is revealed.
Egypt, you can see the link, right? It's the glory. There's the golden age, if you like, of the NHI. Now, when we say NHI, bro, when we're talking about these entities that we've been worshipped in Egypt, when we're talking about these entities that these people throughout even modern Western history, the Enlightenment period, and afterwards the Industrial Revolution, where these thinkers and movers and shakers were contacting these entities behind closed doors, whether you're looking at it from today's 21st century perspective, where you have certain UFO contactees who are getting downloads from these entities, who are giving predictions by these entities. NHI, what does that mean? Are they the same entities that are, once again approaching humanity? And before even that, I mean, what are the NHI according to your understanding?
From what I understand from Islam, and I think we need to explain, we need to set out something. In Judeo-Christianity, essentially there are only two sentient creations, the angels and man. And then kind of later on with the theological development of Judaism, then they become aware of there is a leader of a rebellious element of what they say are angels. And even then, particularly talking about Christianity now, when they talk of demons, essentially they're talking about rebellious angels.
Or the fallen angels.
Yeah, fallen angels, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
But from an Islamic perspective, and this is one of the beauties of Islam, Islam says, no, sentient life is not just angels and men. And just to clarify, according to Islam, angels do not rebel against God. If God said to an angel, go to the South Pole for 1,000,000 years, it would go, it would not argue, it would not dispute, it would go and it would obey. But in humanity, God gave us free will to choose, to decide, to do good, to do bad. But then the Quran talks about another form of creation called the Jinn. And the Jinn are most known about in the Quran because it talks about Iblis, who, for non-Muslims may want to acquaint it with what we would call Lucifer or Satan. And I had to really think about this. And what we have to be careful as Muslims, and this is where I speak to my fellow Muslims, we have to be careful that we don't equate jinn with devil. They are a separate sentient civilization that live, die, have families. Some of them are Muslims, some of them are Christians, some are Jewish, some of them may have religions we've never heard of. And I have a tendency to see Iblis and his followers as maybe the extremist amongst the jinn. They are the ones that have gone to the total extreme, that believe because we're made of smokeless fire, we're better than humanity. And then when I think a little bit more about it, and I really said to myself, how would the devil be able to get so many other of his like-minded jinn to fall in line with him and to follow him and to believe him? And if we look at it, humanity, this is one of the things, and it brings us back to extraterrestrial. What does that mean? If you look at it from the perspective of the jinn, who we presume were created on Earth, Earth is their home, we're the extraterrestrials. Because Adam wasn't made on the Earth. He was made of elements, you could say, that we could call the Earth. But, unlike Christianity, we don't believe the Garden of Eden is somewhere off in Mesopotamia. It's clear that it's off this world. Where it is, I don't know. I believe in it, and that's all I'm required to believe in. So then Adam and Eve, Hawa, come to the earth, and probably that's maybe what would have been a rallying point for Iblis to say, well, look, we've got these strange creatures that invaded our planet, and obviously Iblis is going to fill out of a way because maybe he sees that God's now favored humanity and that the jinn are not this, but it's kind of like, but if God has given humanity dominion over the earth, then the question that jinn need to ask themselves is, why would God do that? What did they do? How were they rebellious to God? And I think, maybe that's a question only a jinn could answer.
Yeah, of course.
But on the day of judgment, all things will be made clear.
Oh, absolutely. So yeah, and I think there's so much to learn from those original origin stories Allah mentions.
Yeah.
The Quran is full of references, what Allah mentions, teaches us how to protect ourselves, what their plans are, what his tricks are,
Yeah.
And I think it's good also you made the distinction that when we talk about the jinn, not all jinn are bad.
Yeah.
Not all jinn are shayateen.
Yeah.
There's shayateen amongst the human and jinn.
Exactly.
Right? And the shayateen amongst human and the shayateen amongst jinn, in some cases, may be working together. And there's Quranic references in regards to this as well. And there's many other jinn that are just going about their lives, without interfering with us, etc. And as compared to the Christian perspective, which is the devil, and when you think of the term devil, you straight away assume something evil, something bad. There's a very clear distinction.
Yeah.
So not to conflate the two. So looking at it, focusing in on the evil aspect or side of the jinn, the extremists as you refer to them, right? Iblis and his posse and his minions. They have an objective, obviously, very clearly, till the day of judgment. He wants to mislead us. He wants to misguide us. He did that in Egypt. He did it in Mesopotamia. Probably did it in many other ancient civilizations throughout history. He's been engaging. If you followed through history and you've read the history very thoroughly, I'm sure you've seen his movements throughout history, all the way up until present day. Before we get to present day, from after Egypt, so you're looking at Christianity, Judaism, Islam period of Islam, up until the Enlightenment, just before the Enlightenment, the modern era. Anything specific you've noticed in your research about the movement of the evil NHI and the impact on humanity?
I would say the NHI, the jinn, the shaitan have always been there present, sometimes at the forefront like in Egypt, and other times in the back. And I think one of the things you're going to find, I think particularly, I would say the period of maybe the Middle Ages onwards, is that there was a rise in esoteric and the occult knowledge. And I think that now is kind of the background that has bring things to the forefront a lot more. As we was talking earlier on, let's talk about Tudor England, Elizabethan England. Okay, we had Queen Elizabeth I on the throne. But one of her main advisors was Dr. John Dee. Dr. John Dee, what was he known for? Yes, he was Queen Elizabeth I, a spy master, but he was a spy master that was also dabbling in the occult and the esoteric. This is a guy that sat down utilizing Enochian angel language, summoning up spirits to get information from them. Another popular organization, you have Freemasonry, that comes out of the guilds of medieval Europe. That is essentially this occult. I want to explain what this word occult means. Okay, occult doesn't necessarily mean evil or wrong. Occult means hidden. Okay, so we're talking about people here that are dealing with so-called hidden knowledge, occult knowledge that the ordinary masses don't have access to. Just to bring it back to ancient Egypt, same thing happened in ancient Egypt. So you would have the priest system in ancient Egypt, and they would go through kind of initiation rites. So level 1, you understood the world in this particular way. And then you got to level 2 and you found out, no, this is the real way you see the world. And then you're constantly going through a system of hierarchical structure that brings you to, at the top of it is the real knowledge of existence. And what's interesting is a lot of it, and I hope we can mention this, it's bringing back humanity to so-called this hidden realization that we are all aspects of the divine, so therefore we are divine.
Right.
There's no point manifesting in what we would call a spiritual religious manner if the people don't believe in God anymore. You have to find something else. So I think with the Industrial Revolution, technology as it's developed, the new God of the age is scientific innovation, is knowledge. And I think if you don't believe in God and then you come across a so-called superior species that can fly billions of light years to Earth, that becomes the new wow. And they're able to do this and do that, and they can have this technology that does that. So I think with the particularly in the West, with the Enlightenment, and how that led into the Industrial Revolution. It's just the devil has found a new way to misguide and mislead. And I think the whole NHI, UFO, UAP is just the latest manifestation of that.
You mentioned the Freemasons.
Yeah.
You cover it quite extensively in your previous documentary. I'm sure your views have evolved. You learned so much more since then. We also have the Illuminati.
Yeah.
That another group.
Adam
mentioned about.
Weissnip.
Yeah. So, well, one, what is the link between the two groups? But also, what is the history going further back? So, you know, you hear these terms all the time, and it's very confusing. So if you can iron it out for us, you've got the Knights Templars, you've got the Crusaders. Just quickly, if you can briefly sort of lay out that story for us, you know, and where does the Cabal come in? Where does the magic come in? Where does Solomon tie into this? You know, and if you could just
So obviously, you know, hopefully, you know, we all know the history of the Crusades. So Jerusalem is conquered by the proclamation of Pope Urban II, who declared war. The Crusades. The Crusaders hold Jerusalem for just over 100 years. And then you have this mysterious group of monks called the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars, the poor Knights Templars of the Temple of Solomon, I believe they were called, but the Knights Templars for short. They suddenly come out of nowhere and end up in Jerusalem, and they are literally given Al-Aqsa as to be the custodians over it. And we always say, but we can't say 100%, but there is rumors that they are digging under Al-Aqsa, that they are looking for the Ark of the Covenant. They are looking for hidden books from the time of Sulaiman alayhi salatu wasalam, or the Prophet Solomon. Now, within the Judeo-Christian perspective, they say, you know, God forbid that Solomon was misguided and he went into, how can I say, associating with devils and so forth, and that magic, and this was put into writing. But supposedly it was buried under the throne of Solomon, which is the Dome of the Rock. Now, supposedly the Knights Templars go there, they look for it, they find it, they bring it back into Europe. And this hidden knowledge that is contained in these books gives them, like, this is the real spirituality, the real deal. But what you find is, and this is something that we know about, is that it's mentioned that the angels descended in Babylon, Harut and Marut. And they said clearly that this magic we're teaching you is a test.
That's for people.
So this test, it's like everything's a test. They take it, they write it down. And unfortunately, we find that elements of the children of Israel became heavily involved in a lot of magical rituals. And we see this in the Kabbalah. Although the Kabbalah is kind of standardized and written down in the medieval period, it was being practiced before then.
Right.
And a lot of it is about being able to conjure entities, to control them, to do things for you. A very good example of that is, ever read Lord of the Rings?
I've actually heard of it so many times, but not gotten around to ever reading it or watching it, to be honest with you.
There is a very famous character in there called Gollum. Okay, he becomes so obsessed with the One Ring that it leads to his death. Now, the word Gollum is actually golem. Now, a golem is essentially a creature that is created out of clay and brought to life. Now, the story goes, I believe it's the 16th or 17th century. It says a group of rabbis, they created this golem to defend the Jewish community of Vienna. And they give it life through this magic that life is conjured into it. And what is put on it is what is called a sigil. A sigil is like a magical symbol that as long as the golem has this, it is alive.
Yeah.
So then what you find is this kind of being able to access into this knowledge goes out of the realms of maybe those who developed it, and it ends up in groups like the Rosicrucians, the Freemason, the Bavarian Illuminati. But what you have to understand is, and this is one thing I've come to understand, these are just names to confuse. And what I mean by that is you get people their whole life studying the Illuminati, or Freemason, Freemasonry, or Rosicrucians. these are just names that the real powers behind the scene use to confuse you. Just I call it the conspiracy with no name. Because if it had a name, you could identify it. You could identify a cause and an agenda and an end game and members. I remember one time I saw a couple of years ago that someone said, oh, I'm a member of the Illuminati and here's my membership certificate. And I'm like, really? Like, somehow I don't think it exists like that. But when we boil it down at the end of the day, it's about supposedly giving human beings real access into real knowledge. Like, you're the real elite. We're going to show you, the rest of the sheeple of humanity, they have their little basic Islam and their little basic Judaism and their little basic this, that and the other. But we've got the real spirituality and knowledge. And it always comes back to man is a God and God is man.
Yep.
And as Aleister Crowley says, do what thy will shall be the whole of the law. In other words, what we would say from an Islamic perspective is indulge your corrupted desires and do what you want. The devil's been around long before me and you.
Yeah.
Devil's going to be around after me and you probably go to our graves. Devil's seen humanity in its infancy. He was there at the creation of Adam. And I say, imagine the devil being like Super Freud. Super Freud. He knows your psyche. He knows how to manipulate. And like I say, I believe that, I can't say that I've got the minutes of the meeting. Yeah. I believe that the devil has worked out and said, okay, they don't believe in God anymore. And maybe they've kind of don't believe in us.
Yeah.
But what can we do to misguide them a little bit more?
Yeah.
And now technology has become the means to misguide.
I mean, psychologically, it's very so if you look at it purely from an existential philosophical perspective, I'm just analyzing what you're saying from that lens. As soon as you disconnect someone from God, a human being, the ultimate logical outcome is nihilism. There's no way around that.
Yeah.
Meaning everything is meaningless. And that has a huge impact on one's psyche, one's spirit, one's soul. People, it makes you flat.
Yeah.
You almost become, like you said, sheep.
Yeah.
Because now and there's also the fitra, which is yearning for meaning and direction for its creator. And if that's removed, then there needs to be a surrogate, a replacement.
Yeah.
Humans will keep searching. That's why the existentialist philosophers became popular. Yeah. Because humans were after the death of God, as Nietzsche said, which is misunderstood anyway, but they needed a replacement.
Yeah.
And then they came with the ideas and philosophies, which failed anyway.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's very interesting if you analyze this now from a bird's eye perspective. Enlightenment, you can say even further back, Renaissance, etc. But during the Enlightenment, this shift takes place, eventually moving people away from God, the idea of God and spirituality. Man becomes God.
Yeah.
Therefore, now man determines what's right and wrong.
Yep.
Man determines the moral outlook, the ethical outlook, what life is about.
Yeah.
Man is in charge. His desires are in charge.
Yeah.
And and where shaitan attacks is, like you said, waswasa, which is in the mind, which is your psychology. And like you said, I was speaking to a brother about this yesterday. He's a master psychologist, you can say.
Yes.
He understands your psychology better than Freud or anyone else would.
Exactly.
And that's where he attacks you most, which is waswasa.
Yeah.
More than physical manifestations. Those happen as well.
Yeah.
But the primary mechanism is waswasa.
I've always believed, and I say this through my own experiences and speaking to other people as well, I think the physical attack of the devil is a last resort because the psychological one hasn't worked. Meaning they haven't got you to give up hope in God. They haven't had you to have some spiritual crisis. So, okay, let's try the physical. Let's try if the physical, let's go head straight on. I'm going to pin you down on your bed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the last resort.
Yeah.
That's the last resort.
Very interesting. And it seems to be less common.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, it's like waswasa is predominant.
Yeah.
It's there.
It's there when you wake up. It's there when you're at work. It's there when you're with your family. It's there when you go to bed, and it will be there when you wake up. It is there all the time. And it's about understanding it as well. And I think this is so important that we understand that negative thoughts that may be calling us to harm ourselves or to harm other people indiscriminately, or could call us to doubt God's abandoned me, God's left me. It's kind of, I look at it like this. God never abandons or leaves us. it's we as humans that walk away from God.
We are partnering with Droplets of Mercy in order to bring life-saving water to the people of Gaza, Sudan and beyond who have been affected by war and famine. The best charity is giving water, so click the link in the description box in order to help save lives now.